Hello to everyone. My name is Lada Kolomiyets, and I'm professor at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, Ukraine, and visiting professor at Dartmouth College in the United States of America. Today, I would like to tell you about the war in Ukraine through the lens of women poets. Yesterday, there was a 2-year commemoration of the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. I should start with my impressions from the Berlin International Film Festival, which is now in progress. This year's Berlin International Film Festival screened a documentary by Ukrainian director Oksana Karpovich called Intercepted, based on telephone calls made from the front line. An hour and a half of intercepted telephone conversations between Russian soldiers from the territory of Ukraine and their families. A small section of some 30 hours of recordings made between March and the end of October 2022. I will give a couple of quotes here, which are not all word for word, but still convey the essence. The war in Ukraine told through the voices of Russian soldiers and their wives, girlfriends. Just the second slide of my presentation as a contrast, as a backfield. My reading out from the intercepted conversations. Russian soldier: Mom, I enjoyed torture so much. I can tell you about the tortures I learned about and participated in. His mom: Son, it's normal. If I had been there, I would have gotten high too, but how else? Russian soldier: No, I'm not angry here. I'm just killing Nazis. Yesterday we were walking and a woman with 2 children met us, so we put them down. His mom: Yes, I don't feel sorry for them. It's their choice. They could have left like the rest of them. Russian soldier: That's right. Don't feel sorry for them. Beat them. Russian soldier: I'll bring you and the kids so many clothes. We are here in the apartment now. They left everything, ran away. They are a sporty family. 10 pairs of sneakers, all branded. I packed everything in my backpack. The guys take it out in trucks. I don't have a truck. His mom: You are a good boy. You are a good housekeeper. Everything goes in the house. By the way, Sophia is going to school this year. Maybe you can take the computer somewhere. Russian soldier: Mom, why did you come here? Why did we come here? People used to live here, and now we've covered half the country with corpses. Why? His mom: Don't you dare say that. They are not people at all. Keep fighting. So those are just a small portion, very small portion of those conversations, dialogues. Katerina Barabash, a film critic, wrote in her comments to this documentary, Intercepted: In these conversations, the voices from Russia are much more interesting than the voices of the occupiers. With these, everything is clear. They came to take, kill, and torture. But it is the women's voices, mothers, wives, girlfriends, that show a degree of dehumanization that seems possible only in a dystopian fantasy. These loving voices ask for more killing so that their loved ones can return home as soon as possible. These voices wish death to Ukrainians. These voices ask not to spare children. So this is a picture of the Russian world waging a genocidal war against Ukrainians and their state. This war was unprovoked and imposed on us from the outside, but it has no alternative. This is not just a war of weapons, it is a war of civilizations, cultures, and historical memory. The empire does not tolerate the existence of free democratic centers near it. Our reflections, our poetic reflections on the war are our diary, a diary of what we feel. The war changed genres, changed people. The war writes its chronicles in our works, in our bodies. As Ukrainian prose writer Victoria Emelina, who switched to writing poetry after February 2022, put it, quote unquote, this is not really poetry. It's just a shell that hit my language, fragments of language that look like poetry. Amelina was injured by a Russian Iskander missile in Kramatorsk on June 27, 2023, and died due to her injuries several days later at the age of 37. Hers is a very honest statement about the psychology of writing wartime poetry. Our language turned out to be as much a living organism as our bodies, and the liminality of our strenuous chronicles of this nightmarish war sounds like poetry. It would not be a great exaggeration to say that these days everyone in Ukraine is writing and reading wartime poetry. Our poetic language is overwhelmingly the language of love, the language of our garden, because we choose the infinity and irreversibility of the garden over war, love over hate. Our garden belongs to each of us. It is the beauty and labor that we put into the concept of the meaning of life. It is the eternity of apple blossom and fruit, the eternity of the sun. It is the road home to the garden, and the garden cannot be destroyed because it was designed by God. We will restore our garden, even if there is only one green leaf left, or only a drop of living sap in the vessels of a tree, because the salt of the earth is people of love, not people of hate. A couple of days ago, we represented a new anthology, This Day Lasts Forever, Artistic Chronicles of the War, published in Ternopil, Ukrainian city of Ternopil, in 2023. And the presentation of this book was held in Kyiv. A lot of young poets contributed to this book. I would like to tell about some of them. What can be said about wartime poetry of Ukrainian women poets? Ukrainian poetry published on the internet in particular, and poets who have been active on social platforms and who largely took over the journalist's function to record history as it happens. So this is a peculiar feature of contemporary poetry. The persistence of Ukraine and refusal of Ukrainian people to die after the turning point day of Russia's full-scale invasion became the world's biggest discovery of 2022. This is my opinion. Ukrainian women poets contributed greatly to the present-day writing poetry in Ukrainian. The nature of poetry at the time of existential Russia's war on Ukraine appeared to be substantially different from that of a peaceful time, which feature I also pinpointed already. The war has turned Ukrainian poets into the witnesses, diarists, and chroniclers of the war, of the enemy's atrocities, and of Ukrainian people's resilience. After February 24th, 2022, Ukrainian poets have broadened a place for aesthetic reflection on poetry and its traditional senses, and proved that poetry may not wait for an indefinite number of years until its revival, so to say, after Auschwitz. Ukrainian poetry did not cease to exist when the Auschwitz for Ukrainians began, but it transformed and became a testimony. The muses did not get silent. Poetry exists, surmises young Ukrainian poet Inna Gonchar in her verse, "The Muses Are Not Silent," written in the spring of 2022. After a missile hit, the muses scream under the rubble, but no one hears, because this is not the place for poetry, as is commonly believed. The final photos on somebody's camera are not a metaphor anymore, and the messages become homelessly silent, getting across the voice, not knowing how to cover the abyss of the shell crater without a voice, without memory of life. Poetry exists. During the days from 20th to 25th of June 2022, we conducted the Old Ukrainian Academic and Artistic Forum entitled "Muses Are Not Silent," exactly as a line from Inna Gonchar's poem says. There were several organizers of this forum, including Shevchenko Institute of Literature of the National Academy of Sciences, Zaporizhia National University, Ivan Franko National University of Lviv, Institute of Philology of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, and also Organization on Relations with Ukrainians Living Outside Ukraine. It was an important event which united poets, playwrights, artists, other creative personalities from different fields, as well as scholars of different ages, together in their endeavor to establish our force and our ability to survive through those challenges. One of the poets who contributed her verses was Svetlana Diduch-Romanenko, a poet and translator, member of the National Union of Writers. I would like to cite from her, maybe a little bit later, because I can't find, simultaneously do the presentation and read out from the text. One more poet whom I would like to mention here, and I will refer to her contribution to wartime poetry several times during my lecture, is Halina Kruk. Halina Kruk is professor of Ukrainian Baroque literature from Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. She is an award-winning poet and prose writer, translator, with multiple publications, book publications, and already 2 English language translation books, 2 books in English language translation. The metaphorics of contemporary Ukrainian poetry has undergone transformation on its way to nearing the genre of testimony, which I already stressed. Halina Kruk, Ukrainian writer and translator from the city of Lviv and also member of PEN Ukraine, explains in her speech at the opening of the Poetry Festival in Berlin as early as June 2022, the metaphors have lost their power in front of what is actually experienced by Ukrainians. The voice of the diarist of wartime experience has been the most important feature of literary expression since February 2022, as well as the evidence that art can create vital energy amidst the genocidal Russian war on Ukraine. The multiplicity of war experiences through the prism of immediately personal voices and life stories told by Ukrainian women poets is broadly reflected on the internet in particular. For a poet overwhelmed with the war texture, some of the features of pre-war poetry have already become, so to say, late style, as it is defined by Edward Said, a famous theoretician of post-modernity and post-colonialism, quote unquote. Late style is what happens if art does not abdicate its rights in favor of reality. The muse of poetry has become the one having no time to contemplate the emerging plots, to accumulate analysis and comprehend the piles of debris as texture for creativity. The wartime muse may even regret that poetry is not capable of killing. In her Berlin speech, Halina Kruk warns the prosperous Western world against erecting an emotional wall between Ukraine and itself. While addressing the Western audience, she tries to explain a painful feeling of irreparable loss. Let me quote from her Berlin speech. My Facebook news feed is full of the photos of incredibly beautiful people, men and women, someone's parents, someone's children who were killed by Russia. This is not a metaphor. Facebook blocks or deletes these photos as sensitive information that may upset users of the social network. These people were not born to die in war, nor did they acquire a higher education or a rare profession to die in war or cultivate their talents to die in war. We will always have a gaping wound from the loss of these people in our souls, in our culture, science, economy, industry, society. This is not a metaphor. Kruk concludes her talk at the Poetry Festival in Berlin by asserting a new testimonial function of Ukrainian poetry, which came to change traditional poetic functions, quote unquote. The war makes everything unambiguous to such an extent that there is practically no room left for poetry, just for testimony. I'm sorry that poetry doesn't kill. These are the finalizing words from the Berlin speech by Helena Krug. These desperate words sound like a poet's personal declaration of war, whose only weapon is poetry. To record history as it happens is the main function of journalism in the wartime Ukraine, but also much broader. This is the main function of creative writing and any kind of verbal and non-verbal art during the time of existential war, especially in view of the psychological fact that it is extremely difficult or almost impossible for a person who survived the horrors of the occupation to talk about their experience themselves, to make it public. Krug details her argumentation for the importance of the writer's testimonial function, speaking for those who cannot speak because of a huge psychological trauma. Let me quote from Helena Krug. Metaphors do not work against a person with a machine gun. No poetry protects when a tank runs over the car in which you and your children are trying to escape from the war. There is no place for poetry when you don't step away from the collapsed basements of a high-rise building for several days, and you hear your children and grandchildren screaming under the rubble, and you can't save them from there. This is a very strong plot for a European writer who could write a book for eternity, to be read and reread by posterity. But someone who experienced all this will not write a book. There is no such strength to survive all this and retain the ability to explain your pain to others, concludes Helena Krug. The everyday heroism of testimony and love for home, land, children, and people, this is the pivot of the wartime Ukrainian poetry. And each of us will have a separate war, speaks about the individual uniqueness of the war experience. Natalka Marinchak, a woman poet from the bombed-out city of Kharkiv, who, regardless of the danger of frequent bombardments, stays in her hometown. In her poetry, Natalka expresses her love for her city, the people and the country, as well as her appreciation of life, even or particularly during the wartime. Natalka does a lot of volunteer work. She delivers food and medicine to old people who live alone in Kharkiv and its surroundings. Recently, she published a separate book, a collection of her poetry called "Відчає спинне, Medicine to Stop Despair." I will read out from her poetry a particular poem, which I already quoted from, and each of us will have a separate war. And each of us will have a separate war, disheveled, personal. Everyone needed a wall, one's own wall, to endure. The university wall, an architectural monument, or the city hall, the wall that in your imagination is the center of the universe, the center of your personal rockfall, the place of strength, the place of your fall, the place of your awareness and sufferance, the place where you were born and died, by death trampling death. Everyone will have their own story of broken paths and breathlessness. Everyone will have their own defended territory of roaring and laughing. I now have a heart of reinforced concrete. It knows neither pity nor comfort. Like an avalanche, Ukrainian humanitarian discourses are increasingly debunking the moral values of what is called the Great Russian culture and literature, disassembling these concepts as myths. In her Berlin speech, let me return your attention to Helena Kruk once again. Kruk refers to this touchy subject as well. Quote from Helena Kruk. I understand that my words will not appeal to you, well read and brought up on the best examples of Russian culture. You may even not believe in them, just as the residents of Borodyanka, Hostomel, or Bucha near Kyiv did not believe that the Russians came to kill them, civilians, without weapons, without reason or cause, indiscriminately, regardless of whether they are men or women, children or the elderly, to kill, rape, and crush with tanks. I don't know of any metaphors that could make these words more appealing, or at least less shocking. End of quote. The voice of the diarist of war experiences is the most important feature of literary expression in Ukraine since February 2022. Poetry journalism, which took on the task of chronicling the brutal war happenings, finds itself confronted with an even more difficult task: how to convey the inexpressible of this traumatic experience to other people, other countries. I will turn again to Kruk's speech at the Poetry Festival in Berlin, because it is truly a seminal speech, noted for this precise wording. Quote, war creates a gap between those who have experienced it and those who are far from it. With each passing day of the war, I see that it is more and more difficult to explain to people from the outside what we feel here on the inside. And I want to explain less and less. We speak in an increasingly incomprehensible language. We are not into poetry. When your husband is at war, some relatives are in a terrible occupation in the Kherson region, and others are under constant shelling in the Kharkiv region. When you have to constantly deal with the sirens of air raids because what flies in after them really hits and kills, it is difficult to stay above this fact. Poetry, then, acquires very peculiar forms: a spontaneous prayer, a stingy testimony, a lament, or even a curse to the enemy. These are not the forms of poetry to which modern European culture is accustomed. They are functional and ritualistic, too primeval in their emotional coloring, too subjective, too pathetic, and intolerant. It is difficult to be tolerant of the enemy who kills you and your children. After killing one, they move on to the next. I don't think anyone could stay above that, says Helena Kruk. In her poem, To and Back, Kruk writes about the unfitting of war in the eyes of Western world, even if the words for war may be found by survivors and those who have experienced it. Let me quote, "War does not fit in with the world in peace, as mutilation with an evening dress, too heavy a look, too sharp a word, too brutal effect. We'd better close the eyes of death with your own palms, oh dear, because you are brave enough, you are closer to it." Incompatibility of war and peace, of poetry and war, calls for the memory to work in place of creativity. Each gaping wound turns into a heart-rending cry of the muses who became diarists and witnesses of destruction. How long will it take for the post-genocide Ukrainian poetry to appear? And what will it look like if the metaphors of the pre-war poetry have already become a late style, as defined by Edward Said? Poetry cannot kill, but it can heal. Already does, and more intensely than ever. The healing power of poetry as a witness of war crimes in Ukraine is encoded in Crook's poems, in particular in this one. All you can do is say a prayer. Death does sometimes make mistakes, not recognizing who is hers. Here she goes along the field paths. Her heart is rock dry, acidified, hard, her sickle dulled. Unbridled grasshoppers chirp, and summer unfasten the safety bells, but do not let this fool you. Don't be lulled by the scent of the rustling herbs, by the abyss of the sky, and above the shadow a bird striving up and up. Those shadows and silences in the steppes are brief. Press your body into the land you love, relieved. Past she goes, does not see, and is gone. Let there be someone to beg you from death. Let a wounded grasshopper carry you away. Let it bring you alive. In the blazing summer, you crawled out of the glow to those clean waters and wild grass unmowed, having lived through everything then. Internet publications of poetry are abundant with women-created poems witnessing the war experience. And further, I would like to tell, at least in a couple of words, about Ukrainian legendary woman poet, whose poetry is widely spread on social platforms and published. The name of this poet is Lina Kostenko. So internet publications of poetry by a legendary contemporary woman poet and outstanding humanitarian leader, Lina Kostenko, as well as verses attributed to Kostenko, by the way, proved to be more frequent after February 24th, 2022. The quotes from her historical novel in verse Berestechko, which was written as early as 1966-67 and published only in independent Ukraine, have become particularly popular on social platforms. For instance, the following quatrain, in which the actions of the aggressor are condemned, appeared on Kostenko's Facebook page on March 6, 2022, and it became more popular today and even before this day, thanks to reposts and retweets. Це ж треба мати сатанинський намір, чаїть в собі невиліковний сказ, щоб тяжко так знущатися над нами, та ще й в усьому звинувачувати нас. You must have a satanic intention, harbor an incurable rabies in yourself, to mock us so hard and at that accuse us of everything. So this is, of course, an address, reminiscence to the president of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Other popular quatrains from Berestechko appeared on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms. They are the following. Розп'ято нас між заходом і сходом, що не орел печінку нам довбе. Зласкався доле над моїм народом, щоб він не дався знівечить себе. We are crucified between the west and the east. Each and every eagle pecks our liver. Have mercy on my people of fate, so that we resist this mutilation and killing. Another quote. Ми воїни, не ледарі, нележні, і наше діло праведне і святе, бо хто за що, а ми за незалежність. Отож, нам так і важко через те. Warriors we are, no lazy, no inert. Our cause is saint and right. We stand for independence. This makes so tough our fight. As early as 2015, Lina Kostenko, when she celebrated her birthday on March 19th, she joined the humanitarian action second front of the anti-terrorist operation, because at that time the war at the east of Ukraine was called the anti-terrorist operation. Humanitarian aid and books were collected for the soldiers of the volunteer battalion Kyiv, Kyiv-1, and for the children who remained in the territory of this anti-terrorist operation. So, Lina Kostenko handed over to the front several collections of her poems with the words of support. On the title page of one of her books, taken to the front line, Lina Kostenko wrote a poem by hand. І жах, і кров, і жах, і кров, і смерть, і відчай, і клекіт хижої орди, маленький сірий чоловічок, накоїв чорної біди. Це звір огидної породи, лохнес холодної неви. Куди ж ви дивитесь, народи? Сьогодні ми, а завтра ви. This poem was translated by a friend of mine, a well-known translator and freelance interpreter in America, Svetlana Bujak-Jones. Horror, blood, death, and despair, the screeching of a vulture's horde. A little gray man has brought a black scourge. This is a beast of a dreadful breed, the Loch Ness monster of the cold Neva. Which way are you looking, peoples? Today's our turn, tomorrow is yours. Allusions to popular Ukrainian poets and poetry concurrently written as addressed to Lina Kostenko, but not exactly written by Kostenko, are popular and can be frequently encountered on media platforms nowadays. On the example, for instance, of Lina Kostenko's popularity, a new folklore genre can be singled out, which I call poetic mystification, or poems attributed to outstanding poets, which, however, are not authored by them. as several poems which are not authored by Lina Kostenko and popular on the internet and attributed to Kostenko. In particular, Ukrainian social media platforms, retweets and reposts broadly attribute to Kostenko the poems of other authors, such as A Stolen Spring, Украдена весна, by Olena Horgol-Ignatieva, which was first published by the real author on March 17th, 2022, and the poem When the War Ends, Коли закінчиться війна, by Halina Potopyak, first published by the real author on August 23rd, 2022. I should perhaps, and stop sharing my screen and switch to reading out some poetry, more poems. For instance, I promised to return to Svetlana Diduch-Romanenko, her poem about refugee women. We were told, export only the most valuable, and we took our children out. However, all the children are ours now, marked in the box temporary displacement, in the customs declaration of war. The former exporter of bread is now the leader in the export of salt, on the cheeks of Ukrainian women. We left our computers at home, but each of us is now a hard disk, data carrier, memory card for hundreds of terabytes, which cannot be formatted by daily bombardment. We are witnesses of war crimes. Install protection program. Accept the terms of confidentiality. Your data will be transferred worldwide. Agree. Be strong. Be strong. Be strong. Grandma, did you want your granddaughter to be strong when you invented only the happy endings for your fairy tales? Most of us, I regret the white. Most of all, I regret the white dress in which I was happy. The sky covered with chestnut blossoms, the air defense of my peaceful life. White firewall, hell fireworks, 100 shades of white turning red and black, the flag of my country's pain. In my pocket a chestnut, surprise greeting from home. We were told, take away only the most valuable. But how to take away 3,548 kilometers of love if I didn't carry even one white dress marked in the box? Permanent return. So I would like to conclude my lecture with those words rephrased from the poem by Svetlana Diduch-Romanenko. Ukrainian women are writing wartime poetry as their permanent return home. Thank you very much.